Advanced TV Herstory, the podcast that brings you fresh perspective on the importance of TV in our lives. We tell stories of leadership, persistence, and achievement of TV women because in the lives of women, no other media platform has influenced or inspired so many. Lo, these 60 years. Women of all ages have been impacted by what they've seen and will see on TV. So join us for a little advanced TV Herstory by streaming it directly on our website, tvherstory.com, or anywhere you find podcasts. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams. Welcome, Herstorians. We're glad you're joining us for this special episode of Advanced TV Herstory. Associate producer Monica Rivera's deep interest in the Honeymooners is nothing short of amazing. You're about to hear from her not just about how it so richly influenced this Gen Xer's urban upbringing, but how Audrey Meadows, the Alice to Jackie Gleason's Ralph, Kramden, was another unsung, talented feminist from TV's first generation. In addition to this podcast, you can hear Monica's own podcast, You Wanna Do What, at the website by the same name, youwannadowhat.com. Think of it as an intimate chat about your pursuit of goals, dreams, and always wanted to try items. Okay, the Honeymooners? Love it? Hate it? Don't care? Well, you should. Its popularity is timeless, and its reach, well, it's amazing, actually. It's much further than you would expect. So nearly 63 years after its debut, no program in the history of TV has seen so many incarnations. It's been aired live and on film and tape and in black and white and color. And it's appeared as sketch comedy, situation comedy, and musical versions, succeeding in every different form of distribution: network, syndicated, cable, as well as home video, remember VHS, and on DVD. You can also find much of it on YouTube. So what is it about the timeless, the classic, the fact that this TV show has been around and with us for so long? Okay, The Honeymooners is an American TV sitcom by and starring Jackie Gleason, who himself was a legend, but it also co-starred this fabulous woman named Audrey Meadows, and she is unsung. It's originally based on a recurring sketch comedy, that is, basic sort of written comedy of the same name, The Honeymooners, and it got its start as part of the DuPont variety series. It was called The Cavalcade of Stars, hosted by Jackie Gleason, who also was this big orchestra dude, and it subsequently made its way to CBS as The Jackie Gleason Show. The overwhelming popularity of the sketches that were integrated in then with musical segments made it become The Honeymooners as a filmed half-hour series. So it debuted on October 1st, 1955, long before I ever appeared on this earth, and it was on CBS. And lo and behold, fans, it has been on TV screens almost consistently ever since. So there you have it, the backstory, the backstory of The Honeymooners. And now on with the show and Monica Rivera.
Thank you, Cynthia, and a warm hello to Advanced TV Herstory listeners. I'm Monica, and I'm pleased to make my debut discussing one of my all-time favorite shows, The Honeymooners. The Classic 39, as the original episodes are often called, ran for merely a single season, from 1955 to 1956. Although Ralph Kramden may be the most noted character on the show, true fans know that Alice, Ralph's wife, played by the incomparable Audrey Meadows, was the glue holding everything together. Before we get ahead of ourselves, listeners, I should perhaps tell you a little about me. The final episode of The Honeymooners aired over 30 years before I was born, yet the show is etched into my childhood memories as clearly as any modern-day television program. You see, I'm a first-generation Latin woman born in the Bronx, New York. Like the Kramdens, I grew up in a no-frills apartment building, often shouting up, down, or out to my neighbors from the kitchen window, the bedroom window, and yes, even sometimes from the bathroom window. Our building was old. Don't believe me? In our kitchen, there was a small box carved into the wall sitting beneath the window that some have referred to as one of the earliest fridges, and others have called a potato cooler. Then there was the dumbwaiter, no longer functioning, of course, but the door remained, simply painted over and sealed shut. It was in this apartment that I sat on the floor happily consuming episode after episode of The Honeymooners. As a 7-year-old girl, and to this day, Alice reminded me of my maternal grandmother. They both had a head full of red hair, red lips, and always in a skirt. Alice possessed a quiet strength and grace, even when she had every right to lose her cool. My grandfather, on the other hand, was just like Ralph, shaped similarly, and boy, did they both make an entrance. My grandfather was gregarious and charming, but also quick to anger. Unlike Ralph, my grandfather earned a good wage and was quite the saver. But when it came to upgrading anything in the home, appliances or furniture, he was as stubborn as Ralph, opting to retain the same furniture year after year. I began to see Alice and my grandmother as one and the same, and I rooted for them both. The Honeymooners was distinct amongst the suburban counterparts. During that era, shows included Leave It to Beaver, Father Knows Best, My Three Sons, The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. Those shows relied on traditional television tropes. A nuclear family, working dad, stay-at-home mom, couple of kids, all sat in the backdrop of a comfortable suburban home. These shows felt more like watching a fantasy land, and not at all reflective of my own personal experience. The Honeymooners was rare. It depicted the struggling working class, and in place of a 3-bedroom house was a single-bedroom apartment, sparsely decorated, in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. The Kramdens never bore children, seldomly upgraded an appliance, and lived without many of the creature comforts shared by their neighbors and peers. In Audrey Meadows' 1994 memoir, Love, Alice, My Life as a Honeymooner, which I will cite frequently in this episode, Meadows details the reason for the home simplicity. She writes, Jackie's father had, in New Yorkese, copped a walk when he was 9 years old, leaving his mother and himself destitute. He lived with a no-wage earner dad in the rocks of the Depression, and he needed no set designer to tell him how the place looked. Gleason's character Ralph worked as a bus driver, and I'd imagine spent much, if not his entire bus route, daydreaming of a better life before returning each night to his humble home. Meadow writes, if such surroundings didn't offer the strongest impetus in the world for Ralph to get lucky, to grab a star, an idea, a gimmick, to lift Alice and himself to a better life, he was a zombie. And so it went. Week after week, the audience, much like Alice, was pitched a new get-rich-quick scheme, one that would inevitably conclude in failure. Personal perspective will inform your opinion of the Honeymooners, and more specifically Alice. Some pitied her, like the fans that set hundreds of kitchen curtains and thousands of aprons to Audrey Meadows. And in what seems like a letter to me, she wrote, they were so sorry for Alice in the drab apartment that they wanted to cheer it and me up a little. Meadows also received 10 cents to buy a curtain rod, and pot holders from a bank that noted if she banked with them, Ralph would never know where the money was. Others may watch and see Alice as an abused wife. Scholars often cite Ralph's temper as bullying and threatening. Quips like, oh boy, you're gonna get yours, just once, pow. Or perhaps the most famous, bang zoom, are the most commonly referenced. Catchphrases are memorable. They're sticky. And it's easy to see Ralph as the aggressor and Alice, a victim. I too wondered if going back and watching episodes of The Honeymooners, my thoughts would change, if I would look at the show differently. However, rewatching episodes as research for this podcast delivered wonderful memories of Alice's repeated strength. Here's one of my favorites from episode 27 titled Head of the House, where Ralph is interviewed by a local newspaper and boasts that he is the boss of his household. Listen for Alice's calmness, her quick wit.
How could you, Alice? You're a woman, remember that. Women aren't bosses. Men are bosses. Men, they do it all. Men run this world, Alice. Men, they're responsible for the shape the world's in. Men.
Well, I'm sure glad to hear one of you admit it.
Just kills you, don't it? Just kills you that you're a woman. And instead of being a leader like a man, you gotta be a follower. That's what women are, followers. Men, they've done it all. Done it all the great inventions, men. Men have done all the great things since the beginning of time. Give you a perfect example. There'd be no America if it wasn't for Christopher Columbus.
There'd be no Christopher Columbus if it wasn't for his mother.
In this scene, Alice stands firmly in the center of the room, eyes locked on Ralph, completely unmoved by his blustering. She masterfully delivers a 1-2 punch, first acknowledging how man is responsible for the state of the world, and concluding with the swift reminder that there wouldn't be a Columbus without a woman. There's an argument to be made of Alice Kramden as feminist. Scene after scene, Alice, made real by Audrey Meadows' talent, stands unintimidated by her husband. She faces him, annoyed, arms crossed or firmly on her hips, and refuses to stay silent. Her opinion will be heard even at the cost of sending Ralph into a frenzy, and that happened quite a bit. Many have noted that Meadows played Alice during the fights as if she was the calm center of a hurricane. It was a conscious choice. And in her memoir, she added this insight. Since Jackie was so physical, I decided to keep Alice very still in contrast. This was a testament to her talent and instinct as an actress. She knew how to play off Gleason, the big man, and still earn her respect in the room. Need another example? In a sketch titled Forgot to Register, which originally aired during the 4th season of the Jackie Gleason show, Alice and Ralph heatedly discussed an upcoming election. I'll admit listeners, an audio clip would be much more effective here, but after several deep dives, I was able to turn up only this transcript. But keep in mind, I'm reading an excerpt between a wife and husband that aired in 1956. As you listen, wonder how many of these discussions continue to happen around kitchen tables in 2018. Here's how it went. Ralph, when we go down to the polls tonight, I want you to wear that button. Alice says, I can't wear this button, Ralph. Ralph, well, why not? Alice, I'm not voting for Penrose. I'm voting for Harper. Ralph, you can't vote for Harper. I'm for Penrose, and I'm your husband. Everyone knows that a wife has to vote the same way her husband votes. It's been going on for years. Alice, oh, that's absolutely ridiculous, Ralph. A woman votes the way she wants to vote, not the way her husband tells her to. Without moving this into political conversation, I'll ask listeners to consider the weight of Alice's words and what it have meant for a wife at that time to go against her husband's political leanings. This act exemplified Alice's courage, confidence, and willingness to be defiant. Carl Reiner, American comedian, actor, director, and writer, whose career spans nearly 7 decades, has said of Meadows' delivery, she had as much power as Gleason without matching his volume. Now that is a huge compliment given Gleason's major presence and over-the-top delivery known throughout the 20th century. Early on in the series, in episode 2 titled Funny Money, we are quickly introduced to Alice as the family's money manager.
All right, now that that's over, now that the big wind is gone, let me have the money. It comes to about $15.
I'm not giving you a dime, Ralph.
What do you mean you're not giving me a dime? Who died and left you, boss?
You needn't act so surprised, Ralph. You know perfectly well why you're not getting the money. Your lodge dues is supposed to come out of your allowance.
When I spent my allowance. Oh, look, Alice, don't start anything. I gotta have the money. You know that all the members down there are my pals, my buddies, my friends. They'll throw me out if I don't pay my dues. Alice, don't start. I gotta have the money. Please, Alice, do you know how embarrassing it would be to be thrown out of the Raccoon Lodge?
Certainly. It's pretty embarrassing just to be in it.
Look, I know there's money around here someplace, and I demand it.
In this clip, Ralph has one of his classic tantrums, begging, whining, demanding. Alice is unflustered, patiently listening and reminding Ralph of his allowance. She controls both the budget and the checkbook. The scene illustrates Alice's willingness to stand up to her husband, even as he pouts and stomps around the room. In this way, Alice and her portrayer, Audrey, affectionately referred to as Aud by Gleason and the rest of the cast, are not very different. When Meadows was first offered the role of Alice Kramden, she was given a week-by-week contract. That's right. Meadows, a central figure in a successful television series, could be terminated from the show after each week and not be paid a dime. However, the structure of the contract also meant that Meadows could choose to leave on her own accord whenever she wanted. Eager to get a deal done, executives began to pressure Meadows into signing a contract before the season concluded. They wanted it all wrapped up going into summer hiatus. She refused. Of this time, Meadows writes, "An actress may well receive fond pats and airy compliments and still be paid off in subway tokens on the fire stairs, unless she represents clearly that she has made a contribution to the successful work and needs to be rewarded for her zeal and energy." She added, "You must ask or you shall never receive. Many of today's working women, whether in high-tech or retail or assembly line, seem to think they will be recognized and promoted and rewarded by a form of divine osmosis. It won't happen, ladies. Wishing won't make it so. Men learned this a long time ago." Meadows not only had a new contract that summer, but with the help of her lawyer brother, was the only member of the cast to negotiate lifetime residuals. May I remind everyone that the show continues to air over 60 years after its debut? Not even Jackie Gleason himself thought to include such an important clause in his contract. And year after year, decade after decade, Meadows remained the only cast member to continue to get paid every time an episode of The Honeymooners re-aired. When viewing The Honeymooners with a 2018 lens, it's understandable how many may sum up Ralph neatly as chauvinistic and stubborn. I would caution against that conclusion. When asked where Gleason had come up with the character of Ralph, Meadows shares that creating his characters usually began with looking at all the people on the subway and figuring out how they got that way. Then he'd add his typical reply, "In my part of Brooklyn, we had a million Ralph Kramdens." This single statement may explain why The Honeymooners has endured, why many other sitcoms have slipped from memory, and what fascinates some, but not me as a loyal fan of the show. The Honeymooners has continued to welcome new audiences to its fan base. In an article titled "Ralph Kramden and the Honeymooners Turned the Big 5-0, sort of, published in Television Quarterly, writer Ron Simon notes, "Generations of viewers cutting across lines of race and class have found profound meaning in the show's relative simplicity." In 2005, famed comedian Cedric the Entertainer produced and starred in a theatrical remake of the series with an all-black cast. When asked his thoughts on the show's protagonist, Cedric was quick to mention Ralph's universal appeal. He said, "He's a little bit gruff, and he can be tough on his friends, but Ralph is lovable because he is everyman." And that right there, it's the everyman feeling that gathers audiences across ethnicities and gender. It didn't matter that the show was set in Brooklyn and I lived in the Bronx, or that the Kramdens were white and I'm Latin. What mattered was the universal appeal, looking at people like us, like Ralph, that we all knew and we could all relate to. As explained in the article Televising Masculinities, Blue-Collar Masculinity in the 1950s in The Honeymooners, he, meaning Ralph, is the model of the blue-collar working men who define themselves by their size, voice, and control in the home. Gleason was thoughtful and careful to present an image of America where life did not revolve around consumer products, because not every working American can earn enough money to pay for luxuries as they struggle to make enough to survive. The show speaks to viewers of a particular class and offers a promise of a nurturing housewife and an elusive, but not impossible, American dream. Episode 30, The Loudspeaker, offers a rare tender moment of coddling from Alice to Ralph. Thinking he is about to be named Raccoon of the Year, the highest honor among his peers in his social group, Ralph prepares an acceptance speech, and in the end, Alice finds out that the honor will be awarded to Norton, Ralph's best friend. She knows he's going to be crushed. She knows how much he wanted it, and she knows yet again something didn't work out in Ralph's favor. She gently consoles her husband with these loving words.
Ralph, I know how you must feel. I know how much you wanted to win that Raccoon of the Year award, and how hard it must be for you to find out that you're not getting it. But there's always next year, Ralph, and another Raccoon of the Year award. And you know something, Ralph? I bet you'll win it. And even if you don't, Ralph, there's something else that I want to tell you. You'll always be Raccoon of the Year around this house.
It was in scenes like this, and many more, that fans came to recognize Alice as Ralph's true backbone. Ralph was such a big physical presence, and yet his dreams were even bigger. And Alice was just the kind of woman who knew how to console him and be bigger than he needed. Alice was strong enough to carry Ralph in his dreams. The relationship between my grandparents was as nuanced as that of Alice and Ralph. To many, it can be labeled and dismissed as unhappy, toxic, or one-sided. To others, the marriage was layered, rooted in love, but oftentimes overshadowed by antiquated thinking, financial disagreements, and general discord. The Kramden's life as depicted on the series was undeniably real to the working class. Despite their best efforts, they seemed fated to their one-bedroom apartment and a view of the back of the Chinese restaurant seen from their kitchen window. In the middle of these everyday struggles, intimacy and affection seems easiest to sacrifice. However, even the strongest soldiers need rest. And in the episode Young Man with the Horn, we witness a compassionate exchange between the couple.
Ralph.
Don't say anything. Don't say anything, Alice. I know how you feel. You know how I feel. Boy, what a mokes I am. I'm gonna make good. I'm gonna list all my weak points, and I'm gonna list all my strong points. I'm gonna be a success. Not gonna be a failure anymore. All right, that's a laugh.
No, it's not a laugh. The new Ralph Kramden is a wonderful man. And what he's done in the past few weeks, Ralph, isn't foolish, and it isn't a lot of malarkey. And I'm not going to let you tear him down just because you had one disappointment. Don't you see, Ralph, you can't win the very first time. You got to keep trying and trying. So you didn't pass the test the first time. There's always next year and the year after. I like the new Ralph Kramden, and I'm not going to let you give up. And if the old Ralph Kramden ever shows his face around here again, I am going to hit him right on top of the head with this cornet.
You know something? I did hit that high note once. The day I married you.
The Honeymooners went on to influence all future working-class underdogs on television, like Fred Flintstone, All in the Family's Archie Bunker, Dan Connor of Roseanne, and Homer Simpson. But who would these men have been without the credible, interesting characters of Wilma, Edith, Roseanne, and Marge? At the time of her writing, Meadows remarked that fan mail still arrived with the majority of senders quite young in age. This doesn't surprise me. In reviewing audio to share with you here, I still laughed at all the punchlines as if I were watching episodes for the very first time. Nothing changed. Its shine hadn't dulled. As Simon writes, Gleason realized that we love to identify with our failings. At its best, The Honeymooner seems authentic and real, with Gleason projecting an in-your-face immediacy of frustration and desperation. He continues to yell to that inner Ralph in all of us. To those who either lived or are living in a similar environment, the show remains timeless. I'll concede that some of Ralph's blustering and yelling can be cringeworthy, but my experiences allow me to see the other side of his bravado, the genuine fear and somewhat knowing that this was as good as it gets for him and Alice. Audrey Meadows was awarded an Emmy for Best Supporting Actress in 1957 for her work on The Honeymooners. And on February 3rd, 1996, only 5 days shy of her 74th birthday, Audrey Meadows died from lung cancer. She was interred in Los Angeles next to her second husband. As I conclude this episode, Advanced TV Herstory listeners, it seems most fitting to close with words from Chapter 1 of Audrey Meadows' memoir, again, Love Alice, My Life as a Honeymooner, which I highly recommend. No one writes letters anymore. Something you can stick in the edge of your mirror that memorializes times of fun and sadness, love and effort, and the trillion souvenirs of sharing an hour of life with someone who remembers too. Well, Ms. Meadows, consider this my love letter to you. Thank you for years of memories, some fun and some sad. Like many, I've shared hundreds of hours with you from childhood to adolescence and throughout my adult life. You can catch up on the Honeymooners on YouTube, where people proudly display all 39 episodes of the show. And if you're in the New York City market, WPIX proudly runs a Honeymooners marathon every New Year's Day. Thank you to Cynthia and you, the listeners, for allowing me this trip down memory lane.
Thank you, Monica. You know, what Monica and I learned in discussing Audrey Meadows and the Honeymooners is that viewers relate to TV shows, especially the beloved shows, the classics, in very different ways. And for women, I believe that has a lot to do with where she, the viewer, sees herself relative to the character. Just how relatable is that character to her own life? And that may seem pretty obvious, but it's a reminder that we make decisions every day using our filters and our experiences, and that these inform our bias. I guess that's something to think about. So listeners, thanks for tuning in to this installment of Advanced TV Herstory. And if you want to discuss the Honeymooners further, or perhaps Audrey or any of the other women from the classics, those black and white gems and the early color ones that just, you know them so well, and you now have new insight into their meaning and the depth of the character, the art that was being presented, drop us a note, because we like to talk about TV too. AdvancedTVHerstory@gmail.com. That's all one word. Or follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @TVHerstory. And listeners, you know, perhaps, that you can play the episode for another Honeymooner fan in your life, perhaps one who doesn't normally consume podcasts, by pulling up our website, that's tvherstory.com, and play this episode directly from the homepage. Who knows what kind of doors you'll open up for that person in your life. And if you're not already a subscriber, you'll find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Player, and most podcatchers. Audio technical artistry by David Brown. As always, thank you, David. And the music that we incorporate into this and most podcast episodes is Jazzer's Take Me Higher, which is found at freemusicarchive.org. Bringing the stories of leadership, persistence, and achievement of our TV women to you, directly to you. This is Why I Podcast. Thank you again to Monica Rivera. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams.